just mentioning a few things that we have to remember in our deen as Muslims, as the way we walk in life and the way we look at things. We cannot address complex issues with simple solutions. I want to say that again. We cannot address complex issues with simple solutions. And I'll give you an example. Years ago when I was studying, not years ago, now it's been decades ago, when I was studying in West Africa, in Mauritania, a friend of mine from the UK, he mentioned an improper application of the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's a hadith that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a man came to him and complained about poverty. He was poor. He was looking for a handout. So what did the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam do? He could have easily pointed somebody to give him money, but he asked him, he said, do you have anything at home? Because he was basically saying, I have nothing. He says, no, do you have something? He said, I have a clay pot. He said, bring the clay pot. He brought the clay pot. He auctioned it at the masjid. Who will give me something for this? 1 dirham? No, 2 dirham. He's teaching him, you do have some resources. He auctioned it off. Then he said, who has an axe head? Somebody said, I have it. He said, I purchased it now with this 2 dirham. So he's showing him, now you can take your resources and now transfer it into an axe head. Now get me a piece of wood. The Prophet Muhammad himself affixed the axe head to the piece of wood, gave it to the man, said, now go into the mountains and chop wood. Now that's a very, very profound, deep hadith. We can use it as a model of how to create self-sufficiency in people, work ethic, recognizing the resources that you have. Unfortunately, when people see that, and this is where the UK story comes in, my friend from the UK said that sometimes when people come to the masjid and ask for financial assistance, they'll say, go chop some firewood. Now, is that what the Prophet ﷺ did? He didn't. He didn't oversimplify this complex issue. He walked the person through a few steps. Later on, when the man came back and he said, how are you doing? He said, oh, I'm financially stable. Like he was doing very, very, very well. So in the same way, when we look at addiction, we cannot draw certain things from our tradition and then address it in that simple way. Like the people who said, oh, just go chop some firewood. So if somebody comes to you, a friend, a family member, a community member, says, I'm dealing with addiction, we cannot oversimplify the response and say, oh, it's haram, just stop it. Or if you were really practicing your Islam, it would be able to stop it. Just make tawbah. Just have a spiritual experience. Tasawwuf is enough, or ihsan is enough, spiritual, just focus on that. That's an oversimplification of how our deen actually is. And for many of us, we may have this book at home called Tibb al-Nabawi, just a show of hands. Who has the prophetic medicine as a book at home? Prophetic medicine, Tibb Nabawi. How much of that book is actually literal lessons from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Very little. It's a few hadith. The rest of it is what the Muslims gathered when they were exposed to Greek medicine, when they were exposed to Indian medicine in India, when they were exposed to the medicine of the Persians. And they said, you know what? I think this is congruent with our faith. Let's take this in. Well, Umar radiallahu anhu actually sent 2 people when he was the Khalifa to the Byzantines. He said, learn everything about medicine from the Byzantines, the Romans, the Rum. And when they came back, he said, now place everything you've learned on the scales of the Quran and the Sunnah. We keep what is congruent and we leave what is not. So he wasn't saying, oh, the Quran and Sunnah is enough for us for medicine. He was saying, no, look at what's available, what our other humans in their human experience have collected, and then we'll put it on our scales. So this is what we're doing. That's what Tibb al-Nabawi was doing. It was saying we have some indications that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would say, use honey in this situation. When you balance your foods, if you're going to eat date, which is dry and hot, eat cucumbers with it, which is cold and wet. Have this balancing of the diet. So then the Muslims just went and they ran with it, so to speak. So this is what, when we see examples in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life of him addressing addiction, we have to say, these are indications. He's showing us, go in this direction, have this response, but then fill it in. Take it and run with it. There was a young man who came to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the masjid context. And he complained, he said the thing that was most beloved to him was zina, illegal intercourse. He loved it. He said, I love it more than anything in the world. When he said that, now he's coming to the Prophet not to boast about it, but to say, I have an issue, can you help me with it? The Sahaba that were around him, the companions that were around him, they said, like, quiet, don't talk about this. So what are they doing? That was basically the board of the committee, where it's like, no, not in the masjid space, not around the Prophet. No, come on, this is not the place for it. Keep it silent, stigmatize it, silence it, keep it in the shadows. We don't need to know about it. What did the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ do? He walked him through a process. He said, would you like this for your mother? No. He said, and people are like that. In other words, that person is somebody's mother that you're interacting in that way with. Would you like this for your sister? No, of course not. And people are like that as well. They don't want this for their sisters. And he went through all of his female relatives, step by step. We could say this is almost a type of talk therapy or CBT or that he was walking him through, indicating like, he didn't just say it's haram, don't do it. Stop it cold turkey, which, there are people who can stop cold turkey, but he didn't tell him that. He walked him through a process. Then he made dua for him, the spiritual side. Sometimes people might say, oh, just make dua and it'll stop. That's not the way the Prophet ﷺ treated this man's sex addiction. He said he walked him through a cognitive process, thinking about it, and then he made dua. So he had both the cognitive side and the spiritual side, which we need that as in our approach to recovery. So now, if we look at that hadith and other hadith, or say the famous Sahaba Abdullah and Nu'ayman, who was addicted to alcohol. He was addicted to alcohol, and he was a Sahabi, and he was punished for it, because there is an Islamic punishment for alcohol use. But after he was punished, some of the Sahaba started calling him names, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ stopped them. He said he loves Allah and His Messenger. He loves Allah and His Messenger. You don't know who this person is. And Dr. Ariana mentioned a few times about the spirituality of addiction, and the spirituality, the level of people who have addiction, and the mountains that they are, and that they could even be bigger mountains, and we can't, make a person just the sum of their actions, which is why the move is away from referring to addict, because you're not an addict. You are a human being with thoughts and love and fears and hopes and emotions and struggles. One of them happens to be addiction. So you are not an addict. So how did the Prophet ﷺ respond to him? And how was he incorporated in the community? So I knew these stories, but for me, and now I'll just a little bit of how my path to learning about addiction, because as Dr. Ariana mentioned, that we have to have compassion. We have to approach this with compassion and with understanding. And part of that understanding part of that compassion comes through understanding. I've had friends and family who have struggled with addiction, both narcotics as well as alcohol. On my mother's side of the family, I've had an uncle who passed away due to complications of alcoholism. So when Dr. Ariana was mentioning about the end result being death, and this was the uncle who was closest to me on my mother's side. My father's from Jordan, my mother's from Mississippi, and we spent a lot of time with him. And so to watch him go through this process of alcoholism and not get treatment and eventually pass away of complications related to that, it was very, very overwhelming for me. Subhanallah, I mean, I got the news that he had passed away right as I was going into a final for a course of one of my master's programs, and I should not have read the test at that time, but I had to, I read it, and then I just had to push through it and then process the grief afterwards. But it's very, I'm still grieving, and so I know the effect of what it could do to a human being. This might be relevant or not, but there's a song called Tennessee Whiskey. And there's a lyric in there. It's about a man who fell in love with the love of a woman, helped him get over his alcohol addiction. And he says, but you rescued me from drowning in the bottle. And it goes on. It's a very famous song. It resonates with a lot of people. And I think it's because of the deep meaning that it captures. And every time I hear it, I tear up, because I think of my uncle who did drown in the bottle because he did not find the love, whatever that would have been, in spirituality, in a path, in treatment, in a woman, in family and friends that rescued him from drowning in the bottle. More recently, I had a student of mine through Taiba Foundation where we worked with the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. And to give you an idea of incarceration in America, the majority of people who are incarcerated are in prison for non-violent drug offenses. nonviolent drug offenses, and they're being treated for their addiction by prison, which is the criminalization of addiction, or the criminalization of also as well of mental illness, because they're overrepresented in the prison population. And so, about 20 years ago or so, I started teaching Muslims who were in prison, and then we founded an organization, Taiba Foundation, to teach Muslims in prison about our faith through a correspondence and a distance education program. And over time, we just focused just on the Islamic element. And this was a tipping point or a turning point for me. Brother Justin Abdul Salam, and he's given me full permission to share his story. He said if it could benefit other people. He was a person who, as Dr. Ariana was saying, some of these people are deeply spiritual. He's one of the most deeply spiritual people I know. And he's getting up for tahajjud every single night. And he's memorizing classical texts in Arabic. He's teaching. He's leading the prayer in the prison chapel. He's, for all intents and purposes, he is an imam. He knows the deen, he practices the deen, he teaches the deen, he converted to Islam in prison, taught him, and then we enhanced that. Now he's translating text, and he's, from Arabic into English. When he went home, because he spent 10 years of his incarceration working on his Islam, just the Islamic, the element of his Islam was his knowledge of the theology and practice and tasawwuf as well, tazkiyah, purification of the heart, but he didn't address his addiction. So when he went home, he got paroled to a place where there was drug paraphernalia all over the place. We actually tried to have him paroled to California, but because the way the parole system is, you have to go back to the county where you committed your crime, which goes against, logic. So anyway, he goes back to the only place that he had there. There was drug paraphernalia all over the place. A renter had 5 dogs living in the house. You can just imagine the chaos. And as Dr. Ariana was mentioning, once a person goes back from a situation, in prison it wasn't a rehab center, but he did not have the access to there is narcotics and alcohol in prison, but he didn't have as easy access, so he was able to stay away from it. Plus, there's a tight-knit Muslim community that will check you at every point. So he had that support system. He goes home, he doesn't have that. He starts his downward spiral. The coping mechanism that he falls back on is his addiction. And later I asked him, I said, why didn't you reach out to us at the time? He said, because I was afraid of letting you down. And I said, never have that feeling. We're here for you at any point in your life. Needless to say, he kept spiraling down. He mixed 2 drugs. It was a bad mixture, caused a psychotic break, and at that point he actually wanted to take his own life. So he doused himself with gasoline, with lighter fluid, but could not get himself to light the match. So he concocted an idea to commit a crime, and they called this suicide by cop, where the cops would then shoot him, and the spark from the bullet would set the lighter fluid on fire, and that's how he would die. So he did commit a crime. In the process of the crime, and mind you, he's in a psychotic break now due to the drugs that comes out of his addiction that was untreated by the prison, and then put him back into society with no support system. So he commits the crime. Eventually, when they catch him, they stack everything up, and then he's now facing 37 years in prison, which is stemming from his addiction. So what it caused for us, me as an individual and us as an organization at Taiba, is saying, okay, we're offering the Islamic education, but now we also have to recognize this other element of their life as part of their Islamic education. So when he reached back out to us and said, could you send me the books, because I've lost all my Islamic education books, I said, no problem, Abdul Salam, we're going to send you the books. But at the same time, just as you feel that studying that Islamic knowledge is part of your individual obligation, your fard al-ain, I want you to go on a deep inward journey to find out what happened and why. Introspection. And so with my encouragement, he did. He went on that. He started looking into a lot of unaddressed issues. Unfortunately, the prison doesn't give him enough resources, so he stayed on a waiting list for 6 months to see a professional. Once he got to see a professional, it was somebody with an undergraduate degree in psychology, not even clinical training or addictions specialty. So then I started asking other therapists, for their advice. And there's issues with offering therapy to a currently incarcerated individual across state boundaries, the person in prison, all of this. So I said, okay, let's do some maybe psychoeducation. So I reached out to a Muslim mental health professional who has a lot of experience in addiction, and she said, ask him about childhood trauma and abuse. And it was a conversation I never had. And as soon as I asked that question, the floodgates opened. And so then I said, have you ever addressed that? He said, never. Nobody's ever asked me. I said, all the addiction treatments that you have done in prison, has anybody ever touched on that? No. So one of the books that was recommended to me, actually by my mother, was Gabor Mate's book, In the Realm of the Hungry Ghosts. And I sent that to him, and he said that was the best book on addiction that he's ever had. And Gabor Mate, if you're not familiar with him, he's got a lot of things online. He runs, I believe it's a methadone clinic in Vancouver. And in that book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, there's also some Muslims who share their stories. So then I also, at that time, I met Dr. Amir, and I started asking him to correspond with Justin, and that helped me learn more about addiction and understanding it and having more of that compassion. Then he suggested craft. He's the craft program, the Smart Recovery program. I actually got certified in it to facilitate a group for friends and family. So that helped me learn more about addiction, since I had not gone through that experience myself, but I could understand I could understand more of what another person is, and also to help out families who have gone through that. And then, I could speak a lot more, but this is the book, Getting Your Loved One Sober Without Nagging. It's called Gylos. It's part of the craft recovery. And if you have a friend or family, this is a good book to read. Another book that I read to understand the 12 steps was Russell Brand's book, which is called Recovery. Cover is off of it, but he was, Russell Brand is a comedian from the UK, deeply addicted to heroin, which is one of the most difficult drugs to get over, and he was also extremely addicted. He had an extreme sex addiction as well, and he said the 12 steps actually got him out of those two addictions. And now if you see his podcast and you see what he's talking about, you can see, going back to again what Dr. Ariana was saying, that deep spirituality that's actually there, that was hidden. And I'm just going to run through some of this, because this is just kind of like my history of understanding it. We were talking in a group, an MSA group, and it actually, a person stood up and he shared in front of almost 200 people some of the struggles that he's going with. And then responding to him in a way that I've learned through some of these programs, also motivational interviewing, which is part of that, bringing out that internal motivation and intrinsic desire to change. Using some of that, it started this whole conversation where it was you could hear a pin drop in the room. And I talk about it in some of the writing. I'm kind of going very quickly, but Ustad Ubaidullah Evans opened up about his father being a heroin addict and how he had distanced himself from his father. And then he mentioned that one time to Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, and Sheikh Hamza said, well, I think your father might have, in another realm, might have been a saint. And he said, he never thought about that. He said, well, because those people who are seeking, they're not satisfied with this dunya that's right in front of them. They want something ethereal, something beyond this dunya, but they're going about it the wrong way through substance. And so he mentioned this book, Blessed Are the Addicts, The Spiritual Side of Alcoholism, Addiction, and Recovery, which I bought right there in the hallway on Amazon. And I'm just rushing through this because of time. Another brother who facilitates an intensive therapeutic community within one of the prisons where we work with, Ahmed Adisa, and has been facilitating 12 steps groups for many, many years. I started talking to him about it, and because of his also deep study and practice of tasawwuf, tazkiyah, ihsan, whatever name we're going to call it, ihsan by any other name is still ihsan. I said, could you do, and he was talking about a lot of the 12 steps from the spiritual aspect. I said, could you do a 12 steps explanation of the 12 steps with your understanding of our tradition of spirituality as Muslims? And so he went on the road to do that. As he was looking for some references in the chapel library in the prison, he came across this one, Recovery, the 12 Steps as a Spiritual Practice, wrote by Rami Shapiro. It's a Jewish name as well. I'm not Jewish, although sometimes when I wear a kufi and people will tell me shalom. I guess anyway, I'm not going to go off into that. But anyway, so these are just some of my experience. It culminated in about 3 years of Abdus Salam, Justin, the one I told you his story, and Ahmed Adisa, who runs a 12 steps intensive therapeutic community. He's one of the facilitators in the prison. They both wrote this book together. And we published it through Taiba, Overcoming Addiction, an Islamic Approach to Recovery. And I encourage you all to read it. whether or not you're dealing with addiction, or if you have family, or as Dr. Ariana was mentioning in there, the first step is, overcome. It could have been addiction, it could have been a substance, it could have been a personality, it could have been a behavior, it could have been a person. It has a lot of crossover, and that's what Russell Brand as well talks about, that the 12 steps has applications for everybody, and understanding it, to that. So I brought some of these books. They're available, and I can talk more about that. But it's been a deeply transformative journey for me to understand more about addiction. I now approach